I can't get any audio, any voice.
Classic. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Yes, okay. And you guys can hear. I would like to quickly introduce Esther Marcus, who is a good friend of Eileen Barsheshet, Leha Shalom, who is this year is dedicated in her memory.
Shalom, I'm Esther Marcus. I represent a group of friends of Eileen Barsheshet, Tzvia Eileen Bat Henya. If you would see Eileen today, the first thing that you would notice is her smile. The second thing would be her wandering eyes, for Eileen was born blind. Eileen had a very challenging life and died at the young age of 47, 10 years ago on the 2nd of Elul, Tafshin Ayin Aleph. Despite her circumstances, Eileen was able to connect with people and had many friends, including a group of women in Beit Shemesh. She knew how to be a friend and how to bring people together. She really enjoyed learning and going to shiurim. This kind of Yom Iyun would have delighted her. One aspect of Eileen's life that meant a lot to me and others was her authenticity. When you spoke to Eileen, she really listened. Our conversations were about our real lives, not chit-chat.
We can't get rid of it now.
I hope that by remembering Eileen here today, we invoke her spirit in order to teach us how to listen and live wholeheartedly.
It's okay. Like this, we're good. Supposed to be there. Okay, let's put this there. Okay, I want to begin with a little explanation. The first two talked about Rabbi Twersky a lot. Unfortunately, I never met Rabbi Twersky. And when I graduated 8th grade, I was reading the Hardy Boys, or it wasn't like I was living in New York. But I grew up more on Rav Kook. But what I want to talk about, though, is about the dedications, because dedications are basically between parents and children. That comes up a lot. You know, the children are dedicating on their parents and loved ones. I want to begin with an analogy to focus on Yom Kippur. I want to use an analogy, which you're probably familiar with. There's a holiday we call Mother's Day. We're all familiar, Mother's Day or Father's Day. And we talk about parents and children. But if you remember, there's a big machloket, especially in America, whether or not we celebrate Mother's Day. Everyone remember the machloket? There's an argument. Yeah. So I call that shitat chachamim. What's that mean? Wise men know very well that every day is Mother's Day. But there's this Rabbi Hallmark. Remember him? What's his opinion? Once a year. Now, how do we paskin? How do we? We're machmir, aren't we? So mi'ikar adin, the main law is really every day is Mother's Day. But to make sure every day is Mother's Day, what do? We celebrate Mother's Day. Got my point? I call these anniversary holidays, meaning the purpose of the anniversary, the question is, are these anniversary holidays once a year holidays and that's it? What's the danger of celebrating Mother's Day? The Shitat Rabbi Hallmark. If today's Mother's Day, what do you learn from that? That no other day is Mother's Day. Not it? It's called the Me'ute. But the reason why the proper way to celebrate Mother's Day is to remember that every day is Mother's Day. So I usually use this analogy teaching Pesach, Passover. Why? Or Chag HaMatzot. Why? Because what's the Torah tell us? We talk about this at our Seder. What do we say? Remember, we have those discussions in the beginning of the Seder. It takes a while till we get to the story. So we quote this, one of the 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak, in this discussion. Remember, they were up all night talking? So we quote one of their discussions. He said, you know what? I never understood why we have to mention the Exodus every day and every night. No, enough already. Why are we so obsessed with mentioning the Exodus? It's basically 24/7. Until his Rabbi explained to him, remember Ben Zoma explained to him that what? He quotes a pasuk from Sefer Dvarim, where it says, eat matzah for 7 days. Don't eat chametz, eat matzah for 7 days after Korban Pesach. Why? Leman tiskor yom tzedcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. If you want to look it up, it's Devarim chapter 16, verse 3. Zayin Gimel. But I'm sure you remember that from your Seder. Remember? What's Leman mean? The reason we go crazy 7 days a year, or once a year with Passover, is to make sure I remember that every day. In other words, the daily memory is the goal of the Seder. Once a year, I need this recharge. Got the idea? Now, why is that daily memory so important? Because that daily memory is a transformative memory that shapes how we behave. And that brings us to psychology and the whole. I'm not a psychologist. I learned and just know about it from internet a little bit and all the mistakes I've made. But in psychology, basically, there's certain memories that shape how you behave. Like your first traffic ticket, or your first car accident, your first traffic ticket, things like that. They come as a shock, but if it's understood properly, it can make you a better driver. It's a lot of experiences called trauma and things like that. Therefore, what we do once a year, we went as a nation, we went through this collective experience or collective suffering of being mistreated by the Egyptian people for years and years. Our redemption from Egypt in many ways is a redemption of our history. We take our suffering and we grow from it. And then all through Chumash, at least 20 times, what does Chumash tell us? Remember you were a slave in Egypt, not as a standalone commandment, but rather always adjacent to a commandment about sensitivity to less fortunate people. When you free a slave, give them a bonus. Remember you were a slave in Egypt. When you're harvesting your field, leave over for people like Ruth or Naomi. Remember, leave over for the stranger. Remember, you were a slave in Egypt. Everywhere you turn, when you have an opportunity to rip someone off in business, like someone who can't afford a lawyer. Again, someone there's people who are very vulnerable. It's very easy to take advantage of them. Don't you dare do that. That's what they did to you. In that way, the memory of the Exodus is not simply gratitude. Oh God, I was stuck and you saved me. That's not saying thank you. It's learning from that experience and growing from it. And that transformative memory shapes how you behave. Hope that point is clear. Now, I'll go down to children and a children's movie called Inside Out. Most of you have seen it, maybe? Inside Out? Maybe somebody? Okay, the younger people here. They basically, it's a story about a kid growing up who went through, but it goes through, there's like 5 different people in his memory. Like the kid's memory has 5 different voices, and the kid's always confused because one thing's pushing him this way, the thing's pushing him that way. But behind that is that the way humans behave, there's certain memories that are running all the time. I compare that to your computer with processor memory as opposed to storage memory. Remember on your computer or your phone, you have your what's called RAM, your memory that's running all the time that enables you to multitask. There's memory running all the time that shapes how your computer behaves and what it's able to do. And then there's your storage memory, which is not only when you want to watch that movie or listen to that share, you upload it, but it's not running all the time. So there's certain memories that are cognitive memory that's we're thinking about all the time and they shape our behavior. So I want to take that analogy of remembering the Exodus to understand Yom Kippur. It's an anniversary holiday. What happened on Yom Kippur, right, that we need to remember every day of our life? Meaning, what I want to discuss today is there's something that happened on Yom Kippur, which is not just one day a year that, no, God forgives me. What's the danger of Yom Kippur? I'll give you a bad analogy, but if you live in Israel, you probably remember. You ever bring your car for a yearly test? Me, okay, probably they say it's a man's job, but I guess you've done it before. Whatever it is, the month, I shouldn't say, I got to be careful. Anyone can bring the car for a test. Usually you give it to the garage and he brings it to them. But the week before the test, or right before the test, you check your windshield wipers, your license plate, and the lights. You're really careful about how good the car is running. As soon as you pass the test, there's that relief. I got that sticker, and I'm free for another 11 months. I'm not worried. Now, that's not healthy, is it? You should worry all the time. But sometimes we look at Yom Kippur, let's get through this Yom Kippur, and then I can resume normal speed. That Yom Kippur is disastrous, meaning What Yom Kippur needs to do, it needs to instill in you an understanding of your relationship with God. And that understanding has to remain with you all year long. Just like we talked about remembering the Exodus. I want to try to understand today, what's the enduring understanding? We call that in education, when an enduring understanding is something that you understand and sticks with you. Okay? What's the enduring understanding of Yom Kippur that's transformative of how we behave every day of the year, which needs its booster? I'll use a more modern day from now. Sometimes you need a booster once a year. So what's the core theme of Yom Kippur that's going to affect our day-to-day behavior all year long, not just on Yom Kippur? That's what I want to go today. I'll give one last analogy to another big historical event called either creation or revelation. What am I talking about? Remember Matan Torah? So what are we talking about on Rosh Hashanah? So in our liturgy, Hayom Harat Olam, we see Rosh Hashanah as the day of creation, but that in itself is an argument. On the other hand, what's the theme of our Rosh Hashanah davening? It's called Machuyot. You've heard of that theme, Machuyot? Machuyot is not just that God exists and that he's king over everyone, but we were chosen to serve him, which is the theme of Matan Torah. If I'm looking, what's the key theme of what happened in Matan Torah? Not that, oh, wow, we got to see God. We entered a relationship with God. It's called a Brit. I'm sure you've read about it. Right? We're going to sing about it on Yom Kippur at every tefillah. Remember, Anu Amechat Eloheinu, Anu Banechat Adonenu, Anu Tzonechat Ro'enu. Remember, Anu Mamirachat. You remember that song. It's saying either 12 or 14, I forget whether it's 12 or 16 stanzas. It's 12 different ways and analogies of our special relationship with God. What's that about? God is God of all humankind. We just talked about that all day long on Rosh Hashanah, didn't we? He's everyone's king. He's everyone's God. But we have a special relationship because we have a job to do. It's that we have protexia, we have responsibility. And God gave us a guidebook called the Torah that guides our behavior. That's how we represent God. Hopefully, if we keep the Torah properly, that'll have an impact on not only on ourselves, but also on all civilization. So that's the big hope of, that's one of our big hopes. We talk about it. Remember, first, it's our duty to praise God. Remember, Aleinu L'Shabach, the first paragraph of Aleinu, which introduces Malchiyot. And then, what's our hope? That everyone will recognize God. The two paragraphs of Aleinu is a perfect summary of Rosh Hashanah. It's the introduction to Malchiyot, but it's the beginning of the main concept of Rosh Hashanah davening. Now, that's something we need to remember every day. But once a year, Rosh Hashanah is the booster. Where do we remember it every day? When we say Shema. Isn't Shema, is called Kabbalat or Malchut Shemaim, isn't it? Accepting the yoke of heaven. In fact, what's the last verse of Malchiyot? Even though it doesn't have the word Melech, if you remember from your Rosh Hashanah davening, we have 10 verses. The last verse from Malchiyot is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, even though it doesn't say Melech. Because that's the essence of Malchiyot, recognizing not just that God exists, but he's your boss. Now, it's an enduring understanding that shapes your behavior 24/7. Agreed? Now, that's two big historical holidays. Now, I mentioned, if I look in Parshat Emor, all the other holidays are agricultural, meaning I celebrate in the spring, I have a spring holiday. It's called Chag Aviv, or I begin my harvest. Remember, then we have the 7 weeks until we have our grain harvest holiday, and then we have our gathering holiday, Sukkot. I understand why there's agricultural holidays on the key times of the agricultural year, the critical times of the agricultural year. To be worthy of a good harvest, and also to be thankful when it's over. But we have anniversary holidays of key events. So I have the anniversary, the historical holiday, remembering the Exodus, which happens to coincide with the beginning of our grain harvest. And we have remembering Matan Torah. But if I look at Yom Kippur, what type of anniversary holiday is it? What happened on Yom Kippur? So I'm sure you know. What historical event happened on Yom Kippur? Which ones? The second Luchot. I'm assuming everyone knows that. Now, how do we know that? Well, what day did we get the Torah? You all learned that in school, didn't you? Aren't you? What day was that? Give me the date or approximate date. 6th or 7th. It's got to be an argument, but it was on Shabbat for sure. The question was, there's an argument how many days there were in the second month that year, without going into all the details. But everyone knows the Torah was given on the 6th or 7th. How come you know that? What day did we leave Egypt? Yeah, how do you know that? It says so where? And it's explicit. The Torah knows how to give a date. Does Chumash ever say what date the Torah was given? It goes out of its way not to tell you. It's like hiding it. It tells you we arrived at Har Sinai in the third month. On the first day, we don't know. And then there's at least 3 days in between. But if you follow Rashi line by line in chapter 19 in Parsha Yitro, he's giving you day by day. He's doing everything to make sure the Torah was given on the 7th. But it's not written. It's not explicit. I want to suggest a reason. Now, what happens if I go assuming that Rashi's right? We'll see why he's right in a minute. That the Torah was given on the 7th. Moshe goes up for 40 days, doesn't he? To get what? The first Luchot. And therefore, what happens 40? What's the date? Add 40 to the 7th of the third month. Take the 7th of Sivan. He comes down 17th of Tammuz. Remember, there's 27 days left in. 23 days left in Sivan, and now 17 days in Tammuz. Got it? In fact, that's the real reason for the fast day. So then, what happens. The next day, he goes up to daven. We'll see, that's the first time we have the word kapara. He goes up to daven, and how long is he daven for? How do we know that? Very good. Where? Okay. We'll see soon. Okay. We'll see soon in Parshat Ekeh. What? It says somewhere, right? Okay. And therefore, he finishes davening. Now, he doesn't daven for the second. He davens that God what? No, not just forgive. No, that's really important. But that was an option for the shir. I decided not to do that shir because that would take too long. Moshe doesn't daven just for forgiveness. Moshe davens to reinstate the covenant because the covenant was shattered, wasn't it? Breaking the luchot means God's covenant that Malchiot was gone. God promised us the land. God says, you can have the land. I'm not going with you. Remember that whole conversation? God says, I'm not going with you because you're a stiff-necked people. Moshe demands, come with us. And God says, if I come with you, I'll kill you. You can't live up to it. And Moshe says, you got to come with us. And therefore, something's got to break. And what does God decide to do? It's after the first 40 days, after the middle 40 days of prayer, what does God agree to? Okay. Not, I'm just going to forgive you. Rather, I'm going to reinstate the relationship. Okay. But what's that require? Because the original relationship, you ever read the 10 Commandments? Right. They are very strict, aren't they? Remember how strict they are? God is a zealous God. He's an Elkanah. He's Poked Avon L'Sonai. People who sin, immediate harsh punishment. People reward only for people who do good. If you carry his name in vain, lo yenakeh, God won't clean that away. God he has Charon Af, remember? After Chet Egel, he says to Moshe in Parsha Mishpatim, Ki lo asa lepi shechem, I'm not going to carry away your sin. Our job is so important. Our original contract is strict as could be. Super strict. Like first parents are with their kids. You understand my analogy? Because in theory, it makes sense. How you can be better than the neighbor's kids if you're not perfect? You have to be perfect. I have to brag about you. No, I'm just kidding. Now, usually it's their mouth that's double. Now, what happens in the new relationship? What's God say? What God says? God brings up this ability of, in this new relationship, there can be what? Mercy. The original relationship was din. The new relationship, now I'm not going to say there is rachamim, there can be rachamim. Got it? God's attributes flip over. And instead of God only being an Elkanah, he can also be an El Rachum V'Chanun. Instead of God saying lo yinakeh, God saying, he says, v'nakeh lo yinakeh. Instead of God saying lo yisa, I won't carry. God says, no se'avon v'fesha. Remember all those? Instead of charon, God's erech hapayim. Remember Hashem el rachum v'chanun erech hapayim. All the midot, the 13 midot, which is the theme of all slichot and especially Yom Kippur davening, are all changing the strict attributes of God in the first luchot to the second luchot. Now, once God agrees to be more forgiving in this new relationship, in the second luchot, now I need an official document, and therefore Moshe is invited to come up for a third 40 days. How do we know that? It's written where? You have no idea. Don't feel bad. We'll see it soon. What? That's not in Devarim. The middle 40 in Devarim. We'll see Devarim in a minute. I don't want to confuse you, but it's It's really interesting. That's what I want to show you now. But if you calculate, if the middle 40 days ended, remember if they started the 18th, so I have 12 days left in, or 12 or 11 days, because one of those months has to be short. And I have another 28, 29 days in Av. So they end at the end of Av. And the last 40 days begins on Rosh Chodesh Elul, surprise, surprise, and ends on Yom Kippur. Now, and therefore, that's how we know that Yom Kippur is the day we got the second Luchot. Isn't that what they taught you? I want to say exactly the opposite. The reason that we know that the Torah was given on the 6th or 7th of Sivan is because it must be, the reason for Yom Kippur has to be because that's the day we got the second Luchot. I'm working backwards. Why is there a holiday on the 10th day of Tishrei? What's the logic? There's so many holidays in Tishrei. There's no shortage of holidays. Come up with a holiday out of nowhere in, I don't know, in Cheshvan, or Cheshvan is too close. In whatever it is, somewhere else on the calendar. So you need a holiday. But there's so many holidays in Tishrei, why another one? Something must have happened on the 10th of Tishrei that requires a holiday. Now, what's that holiday called? In Chumash. Take a look in Parshat Emor. If you have a Chumash open, if not, I'll just read it for you. In Perach Gimel in Vayikra, and towards the end of Perach Gimel, on the top of the page, in Pasuk, starts with Chav Zayin. God tells Moshe, Ach be'asar l'chodesh hashvi on the 10th day of the 7th month, Yom HaKippurim hu mikol kodesh lechem. Vayikra defines a holiday. What is it? Yom Kippurim. What's Kippurim mean? Kapara. Okay. Doesn't mean atonement, but that's, we might get to it later on. It means protection from Shekhinah, we'll see. But it's called Yom Kippurim. Where's the first time we have the concept of Kapara and Chumash? So if you take a look, if you go back to Shmot in Perach Gimel, Perach Lamed Bet, at the end of Chet Egel, at the end of the sin part, after the people who made the Egel were punished, in chapter 32, in verse 30, Perach Lamed Bet, Pasuk Lamed, it's the first time we have the word kapara in the sense of atonement, or what we call atonement. It says as follows. It says, the next day, Moshe goes to the people, and what does he tell them? No, you did a terrible sin. I'm going to go up to God and see what he can do. He's just like this. I'll read it now. Pasuk Lamed. Vayimi mocharat, vayimar Moshe la'am, atem chatatem chata gdola, you did a terrible sin. V'ata now, e'ele el Hashem, ulai achapra ba'al chatchatchem. I'll say, maybe I'll get you protection, or I'll get you atonement or forgiveness for that sin. Moshe goes up to get kapara. It's going to be a long conversation going back and forth. But at the end of the day, what happens? Am Yisrael gets kapara. What makes it official? The second luchot. And Moshe comes down with the second luchot. That's in Perach Lamed Dalet, if you want the source. How do we know the last 40 days? The middle 40 days are in Sefer, in Parshat Ekev in chapter 9. But in chapter 34, Pasuk Chav Zayin. Perach Lamed Dalet, Pasuk Chav Zayin. Vayimar Hashem Moshe, Tov lacha et advarim eila, ki api advarim eila krati et chabrit et Yisrael. Pasuk Chav Chet. Vayisham im Hashem 40 yom ו40 לילה, lechem lo chal, mayim lo shata, vaychtov al luchot et divrei habrit aseret hadvrei. The second luchot, and then Moshe comes down with facial shining on the next line. So there, that's why we don't eat. Moshe not eating and not drinking. That's why Chazal understand that Inui Nefesh and Yom Kippur is like, but Moshe Rabbeinu and Har Sinai. In other words, Yom Kippur, in our prayer service also, in the temple, we're going to sort of relive Moshe and Har Sinai, aren't we? We don't eat, we don't drink. Har Sinai is later replaced by the Mishkan, but Moshe going to the top of the mountain to get to Luchot is like the Kohen Gadol going to the Kodesh Kodashim, where the Luchot are, where their house and things like that. When he comes out, Moshe's face is shining. When the Kohen Gadol comes out, remember Mari Kohen? That a lot of the Yom Kippur service is sort of reliving in the temple what happened on Yom Kippur in the desert at Har Sinai. But what's important though, there we see that the 40 days ends on with Moshe Rabbeinu getting the attributes of mercy, which must be, remember, Ulaya Chapra, we get Kippurim. So the most logical reason for Yom Kippur is the day that Moshe got the anniversary that Moshe received the second Luchot. Now, if indeed that's the reason for Yom Kippur, got it? If Yom Kippur is the day Moshe got the second Luchot, let's work backwards. If he got it, if the 40 days are over on the 10th of Tishrei, when did he go up? Rosh Chodesh Nisan. and Rosh Chodesh Elul, I'm sorry, Rosh Chodesh Elul. Then we work backwards 40 days to get to Shiva Sabatamos. And then we 40 days, meaning the way Rashi knows and Chazal know that the Torah was given on the 6th or the 7th of Sivan starts with Yom Kippur. Not my point? But the anchor is Yom Kippur, got it? The anchor is Yom Kippur, and then we go work backwards. That's it. That was a technical share. I think it's on the source sheet, isn't it? They put all the sources on the source sheet if you want to look it up later on. Now, but that's for homework. Yeah. The second 40 days that I'm willing to reinstate the relationship, and now we have to make it official. Moshe is the lawyer negotiating the new contract, and now we need a contract. It takes 40 days to get the new contract and the Mishkan and things like that. 40 days is if you didn't catch on, 40 days is part of the theme because all the key themes of Har Sinai happened by the flood. Remember 40 days and 40 nights, and a very strict relationship before the flood, and a forgiving relationship after the flood. There's so many. Remember 40 nights, the Teva. Let me kill everyone and make you the only one. Noach goes for it, and Moshe davens. Matzachem b'nei Hashem. There's so many things that are just Moshe and Noach. You can't miss them again. That was another option for sure, which we didn't do today. But it goes right to the idea of Tshuva. We'll see in a minute, because after the flood, we're living in a world of tikkun. Remember? Because God recognizes that man isn't perfect, but can perfect himself. Remember, Kietzer Leibadam, Raminu Rav, not Rak Kolayam. Before the flood, he's only bad. After the flood, he starts off, he has to grow up. That was exactly Shani's share in a nutshell. Now we want to go back to my analogy. What's the key understanding of Yom Kippur? What do we have to remember every day of our life? I want to use a quote that Shani mentioned before also, actually sort of quoting Obama. Remember, I said, yes, we can. Remember, she said, yes, I can. Remember the whole thing of tshuva? Remember, yes, I can. It's classic in psychology, isn't it? I want to talk about Yom Kippur. It's almost time to restart. 1 second. It says the revision of Windows has reached the end of its service. Restart now to remain. Okay. I'll say wait an hour, okay? I can wait an hour. We're good. I got it there. Okay. It's good to look at the screen. That's like Murphy's Law, isn't it? 40 days and 40 nights pass. Give me 6 more hours. Now, instead of yes, I can, or yes, we can, I would say yes, he can. Who's he? Capital H? Okay, listen. One of the worst things a student, let's say in school, or a person, no, I can't. If I'm a failure. The second you're labeled, you're in the dumb, remember growing up, you're in the dummy class? No, sometimes we label kids. It's a big argument in education when you talk with principals and stuff. Is it good in school to make different classes? Or you call them the Cardinals and the Blue Jays, so the kids won't figure it out if we get their names. Or we say, Aleph Shtaim, Aleph Achad, the kids are smarter than the teachers usually. And they catch on right away who's the dummy class or not. But the second you're in the dummy class, therefore, and you become a dummy. Some kids overcome it, and then you take the best teachers for the best kids, and you take the worst teachers on the worst kids. That's called our education system. Okay. How come everyone's agreeing? And all the Jewish parents only want the top, and therefore it has social effects in everything. That's a big question in education. There's no solution. Don't worry. Don't think there's an easy solution. No matter what you do, it doesn't work. But what I'm getting at is that the second a student thinks I'm a lost cause, I'm a criminal, I'm bad, that's it. He won't recover. But knowing there can be forgiveness, that's a transformative understanding that changes the way of a relationship. Meaning what? If I think that now there's God's attributes of mercy, God is a merciful God, therefore, what do I need to do? Ask for mercy, he'll give it to me. That's too easy, you follow? I'll try to redefine the famous, like when we say God's attributes of mercy, we're not saying if you say these magic words, he'll forgive you. We're saying if you internalize and understand those important words, their theme and their purpose, he'll forgive you. Meaning what? What's the understanding? Knowing that God can forgive, not that he will forgive, he can forgive. What's that mean? That opens up the window of repentance, as opposed to I'm a lost cause. The second the relationship is either, as soon if the relationship is only midat hadin, you failed, you're out. So, you failed the class, you're out. That's it. You give up. If I know I deserve to fail, but I can learn from my mistake and grow from it, if I know God can forgive me, that opens up a whole new world of tshuva. Got it? Now, that understanding is key not just once a year. That's every day of your life, isn't it? Knowing, yes, he can, but I have to be deserving. So let me give you an analogy, and I'll use it to explain later what we say in Shemona Esrei. Let's say there's a factory worker, okay? I'll make a real simple example. There's a assembly line. Got that? Take an assembly line, putting cars together. So let's say Mr. Yankel, his job is to tighten the bolts on the wheel. There's like 5 bolts. You've changed the tire before. I've seen them. There's 5 bolts on the wheel, and his job is to tighten them. And his boss tells him every bolt 10 times. That's it. So after a while, what does he realize? I can tighten 5 times, and no one will know the difference. So after a while, he starts tightening 5 times. It gives these more time to go. Follow? No one knows the difference. A couple of months later, what happens? These tires start falling off cars. They have all these recalls, and they do an investigation. Where do they find out? Mr. Yankel wasn't doing his job right. Now, what would the boss do when he finds out who's responsible? Remember, you have to take responsibility. Listen to the news. Someone's got to be fired. So what should a boss do? Yankel should be fired. And if the boss had midat hadin, he would be fired. Agreed? Now, what does Yankel need to do to get his job back? Now, if he's a mean boss and there's no room, okay, nothing you can do about it. That's it. But if he really wants his job back, if he goes to the boss and says, listen, I got 5 kids, I got to pay tuition, I have to feed my family, give me a break. Can he hire him back? A softy boss might, but that's not good for the company, right? What does the boss need to see in Yankel to give him his job back? Way before that. I want to go back to the first step the boss has to see. Not just admission of guilt, more than that. Understanding what he did wrong. Not admitting, okay, I was wrong, but he said, I know I'm wrong. I don't know what I did wrong, though, but I know I'm wrong because I got punished. Remember little kids? How do kids know they did something wrong? Right? My nature says bite my sibling, right? How do I know biting is wrong? Because I got smacked, because I can't use violence against my sibling because mom used violence against me. That's how it works. I went quick with the psychology stuff. I shouldn't raise my voice because mommy yelled at me for raising my voice. Now, hope you get my point. What I'm getting at is that we learn if the worker doesn't realize what he did wrong, he'll do the same mistake again. It's not that, and not I won't do it because I got punished. You follow? I need to understand why the tires fell off. He has to understand that there's a reason he told me 10 times to tighten, because that keeps the tire on. So the first thing you need, what's called dat, you need to know what you did wrong. Got it? Now, if I know what I did wrong, what's that enable me? I can fix my mistake and I can learn from my mistake. So that's number one. I have to realize what I did wrong. Then I have to have remorse for what I did wrong. I have to want to do better. Okay? And then there's room for, then I have to show my sincerity. I really want to work for the company. I really want to do a good job. I don't just want my salary. I want this factory to produce a good product, good cars. I really care about it. I just didn't understand how important it was to tighten 10 times. So if the boss sees he understands what he did wrong, he can learn from his mistake, and he's really sorry, and he really wants to do the best, I can rehire him. Even better than that, he can go around and help other workers learn from their mistakes. That was the parak right before David's Tilim Nun Bet, Nun Aleph, Nun Bet. David in Bathsheba. Remember? Where David says, it's all like Leibtag Brali Elokim when he does his tshuva thing. He says, if you forgive me, I'll teach other people how to repent for their sins. So now that I'm a convicted sinner, but I learned from my mistake, I can teach other people how to learn from their mistakes. I can work with Kiruv now because I did something wrong. Or something like that. You can look it up. It's okay. Now, you get that idea? Now, that understanding that God can forgive, that opens up the whole world of tshuva. Not just on Yom Kippur, every day of your life. Doesn't it? Just the knowledge that, yes, he can. But I have to be deserving of that tshuva. In my opinion, that's the key to That's an enduring understanding about your relationship with God. As Shani mentioned before, that God doesn't expect us to be perfect. He wants us to perfect. That's the nature of man. That's how you grow. Remember the Kitty Hawk? What plane was that? That wasn't the first plane they built, the Wright brothers. I think it was the 17th. If they didn't crash 16 planes, they would never built the 7th. They would never gotten off the ground. Because if you give up after you fell the first time, and every time they wanted to do the right thing, they didn't want to crash the plane, but it crashed. Sometimes you want to do the right thing, speaking of parenting, and ends up being the wrong thing, doesn't it? But you can learn from mistakes. You can learn from, or you can give up. And therefore, knowing that God can forgive, and he can be forgiving, even though in theory he shouldn't be forgiving, but he can be forgiving. But I need to be deserving of his forgiveness. That opens up the whole world of tshuva. I think that's why that's going to be one of the key enduring understandings of our relationship with God as individuals and also as a nation, as a people. Because that's how you grow and that's how you mature. That's how adolescents mature or don't mature. And that's how nations mature also, through experience. Now, sometimes you can have a mature argument over what was our mistake and what to do. That's called a badat b'dika, badat chakira, and things like that. When you have a inquiry commission, is the goal to hang somebody or the goal to make sure it won't happen again? That's a big argument. What do we need? We got to find, someone's got to pay the price for this, or are we as a people, we have to rig out what we have to learn from our mistakes. And how that inquiry commission works depends on what the goal is. That's really important. Now we have one. Okay, oh my gosh, one of them. So now we do the fun part. There's another reason for Yom Kippur, which is really surprising, which I think is really meaningful, and it helps to understand our davening. You've heard the Book of Jubilees? Hopefully not, but hopefully yes. Yeah, it's in what's called the Apocrypha. It's not canonized because it's way too late, and it's not really authoritative. It's Second Temple Midrash, but not from God, just Masorah. But the rabbis don't accept it as authoritative, except the Ethiopian Jews actually do. But I quoted from Wikipedia, so in case you want to check it up, don't want to look it up yourself, about the Book of Jubilees, where it's from, etc. But in the Book of Jubilees, what it does in a nutshell, they're into the number 7 and cycles of 7 and weeks and Yovels. They count how many Yovels from creation until I think Har Sinai. But they go through all Sefer Breshit and they give all the dates, everything a kid would want to know. Don't you want to know the calendar, when this happened, when that happened? So when it gets to the story of Yosef, remember the story of Yosef and his brothers? This is what they say. In that Jubilee cycle, in that Shemitah cycle, in the 7th year of that cycle, Shalach et Yosef derot et Shlom achiv. It was in a certain year that they sent Yosef to see his brothers, and he found them in Dotan, the whole story. Look where I have it highlighted in Pasuk Vav there, okay? I'm sorry, not Pasuk Vav, it says Vayishchutu. Vayishchutu b'nei Yaakov se'ir izim, vayitbulu et konot Yosef b'damo, vayishalchu oto Yaakov v'asiri l'chodesh hashvi. See where I have it highlighted on page 2, on Roman numeral 3, in the middle? What Sefer Hayofim say, midrashically? On what day did the brothers sell Yosef and dip the blood in the coat in the blood? Remember they shechted a se'ir izim? That was the 10th of Tishrei. Where's that coming from? You tell me. That doesn't. What leads Sefer Yovlim to reach the conclusion that that event must have happened on the 10th of Tishrei? Remember, by Shchetu Sir Izim. What's the big avodah in Yom Kippur? The 2 Sirim, remember? And they're kapara on Bnei Israel. So if God out of nowhere tells us to bring this whole ritual with Sirim and the blood of Sirim and sprinkle it here and there and kapara for sins for the nation, got it? And in the Bible, we have a story about Yosef and his brothers, but the highlight of their sin, not just what they did to the brother, trying to put the blame on their father and tricking their father, that was like the highlight of that was like the apex of their sin, wasn't it? Doing that and sending it to, and making him take the blame. Now, the story doesn't end there, does it? It's a story about repentance. That's why the story doesn't end there. It ends with, the brothers saying, we're guilty. They learn from little by little. It takes them 20 years, but there's the whole process of Shuvah. Everyone's doing Shuvah. Yaakov has to do Shuvah. The brothers, Yosef, everyone knows that story. It's a book about half of Sefer Breshit is not how great our forefathers were, how they learned from their mistakes, which is, again, the theme of God expects we have to learn how to perfect, not to be perfect. Now, but Sefer Yovim adds something really interesting. There was a triple tragedy on that day. What else happened? Flip the page over. And And on that day, I'll do the English. Billa heard that Yosef died, and Billa died. What's the connection between Billa and Yosef? Yosef's mother was Rachel, but she died when Binyamin was born. So therefore, who took care of the kids? Billa. When Billa heard that Yosef was taken or killed or died, she just died from a heart attack. Got it? So Billa also, he lost Yosef on that day and Billa. Okay. And to top it off, what else happened? And Dinah, Yosef's sister, a half-sister, right? She couldn't take the news either, and she died. Now, that can't be our story. You know why? Because Dinah comes down to Egypt, doesn't she? Okay, but they have a different, but that's one of the reasons why it's not so authoritative, because they didn't read the rest of the Chumash, but that's a question when you read Sefer Yoflim, how that could be. Okay, now, listen to the bottom line. But that's why this day was a terrible day for Yaakov's life. Now look at the highlighted part. לכן נועד בקרב בני ישראל להתאבל ביום העשירי לחודש השביעי, ביום אשר הגיע שמע אבל יוסף אל יעקב אביו. Not it? When the news of Yosef, assumed death, reached Yaakov, reached his father. According to Sefer Yovim, the reason for Yom Kippur, what's Sefer assuming? There must be an historical reason for Yom Kippur and bring Seder on Yom Kippur. So our tradition is the second Luchot, which is easy to calculate. But there's another ancient tradition. It's because of Mechirat Yosef. Got it? And then he continues. Levakesh bo kapara b'sirizim. See the highlighted part? Besor lechodesh hashvi achat b'shana achatotam ki avchut rachmei avim le'evel Yosef b'no. We need rachamim for what we did, for what's happened back then. Uv'yom hazeh no'ad lehem litabel bo achatatam al kol pishem v'avonotam litaher b'yom hazeh achat b'shana. There's no doubt Sefer Yosef is trying to connect the mitzvah in Sefer Vayikra and the Seder Avodah Yom Kippur and Parshat Emor, Yom Kippurim, and Evel, and Kapara and Avonot with the story of Yosef and his brother, which is legitimate Parshanut. But on the thematic side, it might not be historically correct, but thematically it's beautiful. Why? First of all, this comes up in our Yom Kippur prayers, doesn't it? Because the 10 martyrs. So we have the 10 martyrs story on Tishrei B'Av also, don't we? Which is fitting for Tishrei B'Av. How do you get to Yom Kippur? The 10 martyrs on Tishrei B'Av doesn't begin with Yosef and his brothers. It's a different piyut. Only in Yom Kippur, it begins with, remember? I brought the part that we're not going to have time to read it, but remember what happens? There's some Roman tribunal sitting and say, give me, what are you guys reading there? Give me your book there. And they open up Parshat Mishpatim. It says, and it says, hey, was this guy ever punished? And they ask the 10 rabbis, what's the din? No cover-ups. And they say the guy deserves to die. They could read Chumash. And therefore it says, so now no one paid the price for it. You guys have to pay the price. Now, I really don't think that that's the reason why the 10 martyrs were killed. If you know your Jewish history, the Bar Kokhba revolt, it was without getting political, it was a bunch of right-wing fanatics going up against the Roman Empire thinking God's on their side. But that's the historical reason. What did Chazal say? Why were we not deserving of God's help at that time? Remember Sinat Achim? Either Bait Sheni, Sinat Achim, Sinat Chinam, which there's always good reasons for. And also Bar Kokhba revolt, Shalot Nagu Kavod Zebazeh, they didn't respect each other's. There was an inherent sin in the unity of the people. That's what brought down the second temple, the lack of unity. It's a shame how we don't learn from our history. The lack of unity and always having good reasons for Sinat Chinam brought down the first temple, the second temple, and Bar Kokhba revolt. And we're not going, hopefully we'll fix our ways this time. But you can see what direction it's easy to go into. Now, the fact that that piyut begins here, I think the piyut is saying the following. They're not saying that the reason for Yom Kippur, the reason for the 10 martyrs dying was because someone had paid for Yosef. But the reason why they're being punished, they didn't learn the lesson from Yosef. In other words, when you read Sefer Bereshit properly and study it, the message is Sinat Chinam and Shuvah. Learn from your mistakes and grow from them. Don't repeat them. And that they didn't, means you were warned. Remember, you need to have Torah before punishment. Right? Sefer Bereshit is a warning how not to behave. Remember, there's always good reasons for sin. There's always reasons to hate. That's why only Leah's kids are chosen. Remember all the arguments in Sefer Bereshit. Who's the chosen one? They should have never gone there. But when the story's over, they take responsibility. They admit their guilt and they try to fix things. And each side tries to make things better. Remember, Yehuda takes leadership. Yosef takes leadership. We learn from our mistakes. And therefore, I think bringing that in on Yom Kippur is very meaningful to davening because because it's the understanding that God can forgive, and God ends up forgiving them, and they forgive each other. Why? When they forgive each other, God can forgive them, and we can learn from that story. That's a famous view. So what I want to end with is this theme. We don't have time to show it, but this theme of kapara, which I guess we're not going to do that last page. Kapara, remember I told you the parallels between the flood story and Har Sinai? The first time you have kapara is by the flood. And Noach's teva, what protects it from drowning? Which means kofer, which usually means pitch, but pitch is always called zephed or things like that. But using the word kofer means it's a protective cover from God's punishment. God's punishing with the flood. What protects man from God's Shekhinah? When man deserves punishment from God, what protects him from that punishment? I need kapara. Now, if you're in an environment, I'll give you a bad example. Let's say a building's on fire, okay? And you want to go in. You can't go into the building to save somebody because you'll get burned. So what does the fireman need to do? He needs a protective suit. Got it? I need protection from the Shekhinah. And therefore, Mikar Adin, I can make more examples of it, like kfor, frost, it's like a covering. The manna looks like a cover over the land. Remember? Dak kfor al aretz, or kfor, kefer yafaza, like we say in davening, like frost. It's a covering that protects the ground. The kaporet protects the aron, because on the kaporet, kruvim. What do kruvim do? They protect the way to Gan Eden. Got the idea of kapara? So kapara is protection from Shekhinah. What's the idea behind it? Midat adin is what it should be. We're God's people. We're in God's service. If we represent God, God dwells with us, right, among us. We need to be perfect. And because God dwells among us and we represent God, we should be held to the highest standard. But we can't live up to that. And what enables us to remain God's people forever, even though we're not perfect? God's midot rachamim. Now, God didn't say, I always forgive you. I can forgive you. And if I just want to quote the last line of Avodat Yom Kippur, which is at the very bottom of the page. Okay, remember, he does all this ritual. What's the bottom line? Okay, what's that mean? God dwells with us, even though what? Even though we're tameh. Got it? Means we shouldn't be there. Therefore, I need kapara like protection. That's why, in many ways, Yom Kippur doesn't just protect us from last year's sins, but rather gets us ready for the upcoming year. Remember, and Kol Nidrei, Yom Kippur Shabar, Yom Kippur and vice versa. So that's always going to be the question: is Yom Kippur really coming to protect us for another year of entering a relationship we're not deserving of? So then, understanding that you're in a relationship with God, that's Malchuyot, that's Rosh Hashanah, that we're God's people, and God should be strict with us. But even though He should be strict, and we have big responsibility, God is willing to forgive us, and we can learn from our mistakes and grow from them, and we don't give up hope when we've done something wrong. We'll always have the ability to fix things, and God is always willing to accept our tshuva. That's a core understanding that has to be with us 24/7. Once a year, it needs a booster shot, and that's Yom Kippur. And that's why God's attributes of mercy is so important. Not if you say them it's like an incantation. Oh, it does a magical, forgives you. Understanding them and their meaning of yes, He can, but you have to be deserving of it. That's the key. So what I want to end with is something not from Yom Kippur, but from daily Shemona Esrei. How do I know? Remember that God wants us to repent. He wants repentance more than perfection. Remember? Because there's a bracha in Shemona Esrei called Harotzeh b'tshuva. Then say, I want you to be perfect, because I want you to be about tshuva. But that's not the first bracha we make. The first bracha is Atach l'adam dat. The tshuva process can't begin with dat, with understanding of what you did wrong. So we thank God. In fact, that's the first story in Gan Eden, isn't it? The Eitz dat leads to sinning, but also leads to understanding what you did wrong. And remember, Adam is punished. He doesn't take responsibility. He blames it on somebody else. Now, therefore, the first blessing is God, you thank God for giving you the ability to understand between right and wrong. That begins the process. That's called vidui, isn't it? Isn't that exactly vidui, the beginning of the process? Recognizing what I did wrong. Hakarat tachet. Then wanting to do tshuva. Got it? Harotzeh b'tshuva. You want me to repent. And then, slach lanu, then forgive us. And then you pray to God that He gives you a chance with slicha. So what I want to conclude with is exactly that idea, that I'm looking, what's the once a year message of Yom Kippur? Just like Pesach is a booster for the theme of sensitivity and learning from our suffering and redeeming ourselves, redeeming our history and becoming better people through our history, through study of our history. And Rosh Hashanah is remembering our job to be God's people. The core understanding of Yom Kippur is remembering God can forgive. He wants us to learn from our mistakes, and he's willing to give us another chance. And that's something that applies all year long, but once a year, I need that booster to remember that. And then if God sees we're sincere and really wanting to be better and learn from our mistakes, then that's a reason for God to give us a good judgment for the year to come. And I think in psychology, again, I'm not the, I'm assuming Rabbi Tversky was like probably the best Jewish, I'm assuming like the best one of them of our generation. So again, I'm far from understanding, but I think those are key ideas in human behavior, at least in Jewish behavior, and those key themes are like highlighted in Tishrei. In the beginning of our year, that get us ready for a whole year. You have to sort of reinforce them 6 months from now. The Passover theme, that's part of our cycle of being Jewish, taking those themes, and all the key themes have to be themes we remember every day, but Yom Kippur is our booster for that idea of, yes, God can forgive, but we have to be worthy of his forgiveness. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's turn